Welcome to episode 3 of the Wrestling Journal podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the week. I hope it's been a good one for you. It certainly has for me, particularly on a personal level. It's actually going to be my birthday tomorrow, which for you guys will be today. It will be the day that this episode's released. So happy birthday to me. I'm recording this one a day early, but it should still make its way to you on Wednesday, the 30th of September. If it doesn't, that's when my birthday is, and I apologize for it being a day late, or if it's on time, no need to apologize. But anyway, let's get on with this week's episode, and let's start by talking about the hot topic. Okay, so I wanted to pick out a couple of things here that I'd seen online, seen out there in the internet etherworld. Anybody who's new to the podcast and what we do, I look at a hot topic before we go into actually reviewing the main wrestler, and we just look at whatever's been said in conversation online. If there's something controversial, I'll pick up on it and just give my words, or if I just see something that resonates with me personally, if there's a topic or a subject that's close to my heart, I'll pick that out and then I'll just sort of explore it with you guys in this episode and hopefully just shed some more light into whatever the subject is. So let's start the hot topic with a real nice high positive. WWE, congratulations. For the first time in many, many years, you have actually managed to do a really good job of all of the major title holders within your company. Congratulations, Drew McIntyre, Roman Reigns. Everything seems to be the way that it should be in the world of wrestling right now. And it's a very rare occasion when I get to say that, particularly in modern wrestling, where it actually feels like your two biggest title holders are in the position they should be in. Drew is a face, Roman's a heel. The world is in sync. Roman Reigns in particular, I love the feud that they're building with him. Not as much the story itself. Don't really care about the fact that they've gone with the family route. It seems to be the flavor of the month for WWE at the moment, the family feud idea. They've got it with Rey Mysterio. How bad is Rey's daughter at acting, by the way? It has got to be the most vomit-encouraging promo, acting, whatever you want to call it, what she's trying to do. It just makes me want to be sick because it is so bad. It's embarrassing to wrestling. I just wish they trained her a little bit, you know? Just give the girl a bit of time alone, privately, with some good acting coaches. Build her up a little bit. Get her to a point where she can actually pull off a sentence without sounding like a stupid donkey. And it's like, I'm not listening anymore, love. You need to actually make sense and be believable at the same time. You're doing neither, so I'm not invested in any of this storyline. It all just now, instead of it being elevated, and this is where acting in wrestling is so significant for the storyline building and for the elevation of said storylines, it's important that you can actually get something over and make it believable, because if you can't, it ruins everything else in the angle. You could have the best actor in the world on one side of the story, and you can have the worst guy in the world on the other. If the worst one is bad, it doesn't matter how good the other guy is or girl, because everybody will remember the worst thing about the promo. Everyone will remember the worst part about the storyline. And if that's bad acting, then the whole story sucks. Let's not continue with that one. I've got some other negative things to say about something else. I don't want to flood the whole of the hot topic section with the negative, especially when there's something to be celebrated, like the main title holders. So Roman, you're doing a great job. I'm particularly interested to see how WWE are going to let Roman off the reins a little bit. Forgive the pun, but I've got to do it. I just want to see them let him loose, and I think Paul Heyman's a good addition. Paul Heyman will direct the promos. He'll direct where the story needs to go, but Roman is then going to, in my opinion, he's going to be given a bit of freedom within those limitations. Somebody once told me that creative freedom should be compared to a child's life at school. At break time, the kids are allowed to go out and play. They go into the playground and there are no rules. You can just go out and play, do what you like, play with different kids, you play different games, you create whatever story you want to tell, it's on you to make it happen for your own enjoyment and for the entertainment of you and your friends. There is a boundary to every child's playground. There is always a fence line around the outside that says you can't go beyond this point. We want you to be as free as you want within a limited area. And I'm hoping that what they do with Roman Reigns is just that. They throw him into the playground. Paul Heyman builds the fence and he says, be creative, but don't go beyond these boundaries. Don't go outside of this box that I've created for you, but explore the box, be creative within it, do whatever you want inside, have fun and entertain. So I hope they do that with Roman. I hope that Paul Heyman's going to become like the anchor to everything that Roman Reigns does. And that should give us a really fun storyline, and it certainly should give us a great character development angle with Roman Reigns. I've been waiting to see Roman develop his psyche and character for years. He's got the look. He's got everything he needs to be a great wrestler, but the one thing he never really did was be a heel. Even John Cena at the beginning of his career was a heel. And so we've already seen it. We already know what that looks like. Yes, John Cena should have been a heel more often than he was. But in comparison to Roman Reigns, Roman's never been a heel. Apart from like he's running the Shield, which in my opinion should never have been a heel faction. It was too cool. After the way that the NWO was in WCW, everyone should have known that the Shield is going to come across as a cool thing that people want to support. We don't need to push them as heels. We can just push them as badass guys coming into the business to shake things up. And that's really what happened. My perception of it was that the fans took it over, they enjoyed it, they started supporting them because they liked it. That wasn't like a heel for Roman. He wasn't a singles wrestler. He was part of a little stable. So as bad as they could be, he was always overshadowed by Seth and Dean Ambrose. Like, even though you knew he was the guy that Vince really wanted to push, he was always overshadowed. Either Dean Ambrose was too extreme, or Seth was the guy who was on the mic as the spokesperson, the sort of sneaky, cowardly leader of it. You never really bought into Roman as much as you probably should have as a heel. So for me, I just disqualify that. It's not the same as when you're on your own, you're a singles guy going for the main title. This is going to be a really good moment for him, I believe, in his career. And I think it will define whether he becomes the great wrestler that he should be. And this is a real critical moment in his career path. We're going to have to see which one he takes. I just want to quickly talk about Drew McIntyre. Ever since the Royal Rumble win, which was the first pay-per-view I've watched in its entirety in maybe 10 or 15 years in the WE. That's how long I've been away from wrestling and watching it frequently. But I like the idea of the Rumble. I like the characters. I like the way they were building the storyline. Brock was the beast who was going to go into it and win the Rumble. I loved it. I loved that storyline. And I wanted to see who they were going to put in it to beat Brock. That was really why I watched that Raw Rumble. Got Edge out of it, which was like a nice bonus to pop seeing him come back. But the main thing for me was that the way they presented Drew was a legitimate badass. And I'd never been a Drew McIntyre fan before this. Not really enjoyed his work. I'd heard about Vince saying that this guy was going to be the head of the company one day. But then obviously everything went wrong. He left the company, didn't do a good job. But then coming back, his attitude had just changed and the whole presentation of him just evolved. He looked a lot better. He looked more like a legitimate, believable badass. It's amazing how much facial hair can actually help get a person over in that badass type role. And that's exactly what I think has happened with Drew McIntyre. He's aged. And when wrestlers age, there's something about a slightly older, muscular guy that looks a lot more believable than younger, fresh, bodybuilding type wrestlers when they're first in the business, where their skin's completely tight around their body and they're just ripped. There's something less believable about that. But as a wrestler ages and their body begins to look worn, that's when you can believe the badass gimmick. That's when you can start believing this guy's been through the battles before. He's been in the war. He's got the scars. He's earned the right to be here. So I love it when wrestlers come into the business and they look a bit more rugged and older. And that's where Drew is right now for me. Body-wise, he looks great, don't get me wrong, but he's a bit more chiseled. There's a bit more of that worn on the leather that just makes it look more believable and authentic. And because of that, I'm bought into Drew McIntyre. So I'm really happy that he's in the business. I think he's doing a great job, by the way. I think he's holding the company as well as he can through a very difficult period of time. I hope that WE push him. I personally would love to see Drew McIntyre versus Roman Reigns and unify the belts, get it back to one belt. That's what I would love. I don't think it's going to happen. I know a lot of fans love the brand split and stuff like that. I'm not a fan of it. I've never understood the brand split. I always thought, keep everyone together. It gives you a bigger pool of wrestlers to use. People will understand if you're not putting the same guys on TV every week. We understand that. We're not stupid. We know that there are 150, 200 wrestlers that need to be given TV time to earn their salaries. So I'm not going to be mad if I don't see Drew or Roman on every week's show. In fact, what I used to remember from the Attitude Era was have a feud, and some weeks, one half of the feud would not appear on TV. You would only hear from one side of the feud. And then the next week you would tune in to see if there'd be a fight between both of them, or would the other one respond? And that would happen every now and then. And it was a great way of just stopping you seeing the wrestler. And it was a great way of breaking it up and just keeping things fresh. And it also kept you hooked in because you never knew who was going to be on the next episode, whether it was SmackDown or Raw. You just didn't know who's going to turn up, who's going to speak, what are they going to say, what are they going to do, what matches are going to happen. So to me, one brand actually allows more avenues of creativity in storylines, and it allows you to do more promo work. This is why in the Attitude Era, promos were so important, because you had more people on the roster, less TV time. So it was important to give people in the main event scene more of the promo space, and then you could give some of the workers the matches. And it broke the show up really well, and it balanced the show. Whereas at the moment, I don't think that there's a balance on the programming at all. NXT is too wrestling based. There's no character development within NXT. It feels like this is simply a wrestling show, which is why everyone compares it to AEW. SmackDown and Raw are the opposite. They're too entertainment based, and they don't have enough of the wrestling development. They don't have enough of the serious grounded mat wrestling in there. You see it all the time. When they bring people through NXT, they put them into the main shows, and then they insult us as though we haven't been watching NXT, and they actually reboot the characters as though they're completely new to the business. Keith Lee's perfect example. Matt Riddle has actually been one that I would say at least they continued the bro gimmick. I'm not a fan of it myself. I like Matt Riddle as a wrestler, but not his gimmick and his character. But with Keith Lee, they had everything they needed. They presented him like that at the Royal Rumble, and then all of a sudden he comes onto TV now in the main roster, and they've changed everything. It's just a bit weird. I know they've got their music problems and stuff like that, but I just think that they should keep it streamlined, make the progression lineal, allow it so that there's a smooth transition from NXT onto the main roster, and vice versa. I would love it if they would start throwing more of the main roster guys back into NXT to develop NXT, get the talent up, get some of the younger guys actually fighting people with experience in storylines, etc., etc. So that's the first thing. Just to say, well done, WE. You've managed to do something good. And I want to praise WE when they do good things. They don't do it often, so this is a real special moment just to say, good job, guys. Keep that up. Now let's get on to one of the bigger negatives of the hot topic. It's the second thing I wanted to bring up today. Something that I saw happen over the weekend, actually. And I wanted to bring it up because it's relevant to me and my life in soccer or football, depending where you're from. If you don't know, I used to be a professional soccer player back in the day. We have a mutual friend in the wrestling business and the football world of Tony Khan. On one hand, AEW owner. On the other, he owns Fulham Football Club. Not a fan of Fulham, but I'm still a fan of football, so that keeps me in the loop. Anyway, I look at what he does. He talks to the fans a lot. He's always trying to engage online. And I noticed him do something on Twitter. He sent a message out apologising for their performance at the weekend. Now, before I go into that, let's just backtrack about 2 years so that you guys can get the context here. 2 years ago, roughly, maybe 3 years ago now, whenever it was, Tony Khan, his dad buys a football club called Fulham. They already own the Jaguars in the NFL. I don't know anything about American football, by the way, so please forgive my ignorance on that. But they buy a football club in America, in the NFL, and then the Khans want to buy a football team, a soccer team in England in the Premier League. That was really their aim, to get somebody in the Premier League. Around the time after buying Fulham, they also put a bid in for Wembley Stadium. Now, some of you may not know Wembley Stadium. It might sound familiar from SummerSlam 92 is where it was hosted. But now that Wembley has been knocked down. There's a brand new one in its place. 90,000 seater stadium. Really beautiful place. I've been there several times watching different friends actually in different games over the years. My personal position on it, looking at it from a business standpoint, is that the Khan family wanted to move an NFL team franchise to the UK and have a UK-based team, the London Jaguars, I guess they would be called, and own a Premier League football team, Fulham, and have them both playing at Wembley Arena, the home of football, the home of soccer. I don't know how the Jaguars are doing, but I know that Fulham in particular have been an absolute embarrassment to football. They are a joke in the Premier League. A couple of years ago, they finally got promoted to the Premier League. There was a big hoo-ha. Everybody was like, this team are going to be great now because of all the money they've got backing them. They spent over £100 million on players. And what happened was they got relegated embarrassingly. They were the worst team in the league. They looked pathetic. They played pathetic. Everything about them was a joke. And the Khans had egg on their face at the end of the season. Everybody was laughing at them. The fans began turning against them and saying, why are you just throwing money at this club instead of actually doing what was needed, buying good players, getting the right manager in? The manager they had was good and they sacked him halfway through the season because they'd expected that all these new signings would instantly gel and be brilliant. But everybody knows who knows football, soccer, knows that you can't just gel when you've just been bought into a team, especially from a foreign country. It takes like 6 months before you start to gel as a squad. So the fans hated the Khans. And at the time, Tony Khan, who calls himself the owner, even though he's not, he's actually the director of football, which is a role that sits somewhere between the manager and the board. So the first team manager or coach, then you've got the managing director or the technical director or whatever you want to call that position. And then above that, you've got the board of directors and, of course, the owner, which would be Tony Khan's father. Tony owns his football club and he's talking online all of a sudden. And he's saying, I'm the owner. This is what we're going to do for the club. And everyone's just like, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You're embarrassing yourself, the club, everyone. So just stop. And he did. He quietened down. They went down for a season. Last year, they were in the Championship, which is the division below the Premier League. That's the same division that my hometown club plays in as well. So I got to see more of Fulham last year because of the association against my own personal team. And they managed to get promoted. Great. All the money they'd spent, they'd kept most of the players. So they already had an advantage over the division below. And they managed to get themselves promoted. Good for them. They've started the season this year with 3 games. They've spent some money. They haven't spent as much because apparently Tony Khan has learnt from the mistakes of the past. But they haven't replaced a lot of the bad players that were in the Premier League the first time. So they still have some of these really bad players that embarrassed them the first time. The fans have been demanding it. Replace the crap players. We don't want certain players in this team. We need a new defense. We're not going to be good. Everyone saw it coming. So when they started the season this year with 3 losses in a row and the worst defense in the league, no one's surprised, specifically the fans. And they're even angrier and more upset at Tony Khan, because everything he'd promised would change has stayed exactly the same. It doesn't help because he's associated with wrestling so closely, but this is really the point that I wanted to make. The way that Tony Khan is with soccer is exactly the way he's perceived in wrestling. This is a guy who uses his dad's money to make people believe that he legitimately knows what he's doing. I want to be careful. I don't want to have a go at him too much on this, because if my daddy was a billionaire and gave me money to do the things I love, the two things I would get involved with are football and wrestling. So I can empathize with Mr. Khan to the degree that I understand if you had that money, you would go to the things that you grew up loving and you would look to get involved in those things. However, that begs this one big question. Does he really know what he's doing in either of those things that he loves, that he grew up watching and adoring from a distance? Because I can tell you, I love wrestling, but I would never try and start a promotion. And if I did, I would hire people to run the business who were from a wrestling background. It's as simple as that. I would be going to people with industry knowledge and saying, I'm going to pay you to run this. As far as I'm aware, Tony Khan says that he writes the shows. He writes the shows! Since when did Tony Khan become a writer in wrestling? Since when did he go to wrestling school, learn how to wrestle, learn the ropes, the insides and out of every single job within a wrestling promotion? When did he do all this? To the point where he's able to give good advice, write great storylines, and become a good booker. From my understanding of the business, listening to people who actually know what they're talking about, being a booker is supposed to be a very, 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 very difficult thing to do. And Tony Khan can't do it, but he's trying because he's got the money. So while I can't blame him for wanting to get involved, I can blame him for getting too involved. He does the same thing in football. He's way too involved with Fulham Football Club in a role that he should never have. He should not be the director of football because he doesn't know a single thing about football. As someone who was a pro, it is offensive to see people like Tony Khan in football who have no clue about the industry and the business. This is a guy who just thinks that money talks and gets him into any room that he wants to walk into. There is a reason that Fulham cannot sign good players, and it is because Tony Khan has no idea what he's doing. He's probably got his mates over in the UK that he employs who are doing the dirty work, trying to do the transfers, trying to sell, buy, release players, whatever it is. He's probably got his own little lecky boys doing that. It doesn't work like that in football. You actually have to know what you're doing if you're in a position of power, especially like a technical director role. That is the one position where you need someone who understands the business side but has a football brain. That's a position that I know about personally because I've gone to business school and I've got a master's degree, of which I did my dissertation in football. I actually did the marketing side. I created the first ever and the only branding valuation tool for sports clubs in the world. You will not find anywhere else that has done that except for me. Why? Because I love football and I also have a brain for business, so I merged the two when I did my dissertation. Tony Khan knows nothing about football, and I think it's fair to say he knows equally, if not less, about wrestling, except for the fact that he's got a few mates who he met on the independent scene just as a fan. And those guys, I can't blame any of the guys in AEW for what they've done with Tony Khan. Everybody in wrestling has wanted a competitor to WE for the longest time, probably since WCW. I think most people wished WCW had been bought out by someone else. I did. So I don't blame anybody for wanting Tony Khan to get involved in wrestling in terms of funding and financing a direct competitor to WWE. Can't fault anyone for that. The thing that they should have been wise enough to do was to advise Tony Khan, you're not the right person to be talking in this organization when it comes to booking. Give us ideas, by all means, but learn the business first before you start doing that. So Tony Khan, please take the advice of Jamie Carragher. Shut your mouth, take a back seat, get your head down, work hard, learn the industries that you're involved with, and just stay in the background, because you're negatively influencing football. You're making a club that has a lot of heritage, has a good reputation, and you're dragging it down because you're an idiot. And you do the same with AEW. You've got a bunch of young guys who wanted to start a wrestling promotion to compete with WE. Your involvement at such a high level and having so much influence drags the product down because you don't know what you're doing. Your money is welcome in wrestling. Nobody's saying that. Nobody's telling you to leave wrestling. What people want is for you to take a step back, get away from the business. You run the business end behind the scenes and let the wrestlers who know what they're doing run the wrestling side of things. The problem is that from everything I understand with Tony Khan and AEW, he's made friends in the business and he's friends with the boys. He is literally living out Eric Bischoff in WCW, where he's become mates with the guys that he's supposed to be employing to produce really good television as a pro wrestler every week. And the problem when that happens is exactly what happened with Eric Bischoff. Your ego gets too big, you think you're untouchable, and you start getting involved with stuff that is none of your business. Eric Bischoff went on TV as a character in the NWO. He never, ever, ever should have gone near that role. One of the biggest reasons the NWO fell apart was because Eric Bischoff got involved. If they'd have kept it to 3 or 4 guys with Ted DiBiase overseeing it as the behind-the-scenes millionaire that's backing them, it would have lasted at least 6 months to a year longer, at least. And that's, when I say 6 months to a year, I mean they would have been fully over, because you could have continued a really good storyline with that elite idea of an organization. But the minute you bring the owner in and say this guy owns the whole thing, I mean, we know he doesn't own it. He's the executive vice president or the executive president, whatever it is that you're calling him. He's got such influence over WCW, it makes no sense that he also owns the NWO. So now all of a sudden the storylines don't make sense. Nothing adds up. And you had chaos on TV each week. AEW is definitely not as bad as that. But I will say this, at least WCW was popular with non-wrestling fans. AEW has never reached a position where a non-wrestling fan is attracted in. It hasn't even attracted me, and I'm a wrestling fan. And I know I'm not in the minority. Otherwise, Jim Cornette's podcast wouldn't be getting so many listeners each week. There are so many people who are fed up with crap wrestling, who want to enjoy and be a fan again, but they can't because the only stuff we're seeing on our TVs is bullcrap. And Tony Khan is one of the main reasons that AEW is not doing as well as it should be. I'm not saying that it's doing terribly, but it's just not doing as well as it could and as well as it should do. They should be reaching millions of people. They should immediately be tapping into Raw and SmackDown's audiences for a start. The fact that people celebrate, Tony Khan celebrates getting 1 million viewers on one episode. Shut up, go home, kid. You shouldn't be happy until you're beating Raw and SmackDown. That should be the goal. We want to be bigger and better than the opposition. We don't want to kill them like Bischoff did, but we want to be better. That's the main thing. Can we stay ahead of Raw and SmackDown? I'm pretty sure that when AEW started, they said this wasn't about the sponsorship money. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about marketing. This was supposed to be, this is about wrestlers being in a company who can enjoy themselves and enjoy wrestling for the first time in their lives because they've been stuck in WE prison. And yet, all of a sudden, AEW's become about money. It's about the demos. It's about who's getting the marketing and sponsorship deals. Very hypocritical comments. And he's driving that because he doesn't understand what he's doing. Anyway, I'm not going to keep having a go. I could go on about Tony Khan all day. It's very disappointing to me when any owner gets their hands dirty on a product, because it does exactly that. It messes and muddies the waters of what you're trying to create. Tony, stay out of wrestling, be on the business side, run it, finance it, all that stuff. Talk to Cody Rhodes in the bathroom, have a shower with him, discuss the things that you want to see in wrestling, but stay away from the actual booking side. That's like me going in. I would never put myself into the writing of wrestling shows until the wrestlers themselves were saying, you should be writing this stuff. You're brilliant at booking. I'd need people to be telling me I was good enough. I wouldn't ask them because my ego wouldn't be as big as Tony Khan's. I'm not trying to get into that side of the business, but if I had a natural gift at something within wrestling and I could help, of course, then I would say, okay, can I actually do something here? But no one does that because money is power, power is ego, and Tony Khan has all of that. And it's all because his daddy is funding him. There's no pressure on Tony to do well because he's running with his dad's money. Whether you like this or not as a listener, Tony Khan is running on his dad's money, not on his own. He hasn't built anything himself. He is literally doing this because his dad has said, what do you want to do? What did you enjoy growing up? Let me help you do the things that you enjoy. And Tony Khan is like a child still, because he probably hasn't grown up enough. He hasn't been allowed on his own to grow up in the real world. So he's just taking daddy's money and saying, I'm going to do wrestling and football. Those are the two things I want to get involved with. Anyway, that's it for this week's hot topic. Let's move on to something a little bit more positive. Moving on then to the re-review section, where we take a look at last week's episode and we overview the assessment that we made of the wrestler from the episode previous. In this case, it is Randy Orton. In episode 2, we re-reviewed Kevin Nash, and therefore in this episode, we're going to re-review Randy Orton. I'm going to start this out real quick and simple because it's very easy. I am happy with the score that I gave Randy Orton. I think that everything was okay. Everything matched the way that I would want him to be. I didn't change any scores. I just felt like it was right. So he's still a 95. He's still 12th in the rankings. I'm happy. The one thing I do want to say before we go into the main review is I love where they're going with the current Randy Orton character, in the sense that he's getting TV time and he's running for the title. I don't like the character's direction though. This whole legend killer vibe revisit, not sure I like that. It's old, it's already been done. It's something that is part of his old character. But if you're going to develop psyche, if you're going to go through the natural evolution of any person or character or personality, there will often be references to the past, but you won't fully go back to the past. You'll never revisit it that much. But in a movie trilogy, it's the third movie of the series where you revisit the past. That means the first act, if you like, is about setting up the base story. That's where you justify everything that follows. Everything always falls back to the first act. This is why it happened. This is the foundation of the character. The second act always develops that character and usually presents a different set of circumstances around them, but it moves you on to a completely different storyline. And then in the third act, you tend to visit a bit of the history from the first and the second act, but you finalize and conclude the whole narrative. That's usually how a movie trilogy works. That's like the traditional view of it. If you were to place that into professional wrestling with a character, you could almost look at it in the same way. The early years and the beginning of a wrestler's career. Then you've got like the change in direction where everything goes differently and it's the same guy. You know that it's, with Randy Orton as an example, he was the legend killer at the beginning of his career. Then he became the Viper. The Viper was like the second section of Randy's career. There were still hints every now and then, he was the legend killer, he did this and that. But on a whole, his character took a different turn. He started becoming this guy who almost had a multiple personality disorder and became the Viper, where he's like conflicted with himself and there's an internal struggle going on with identity. Even though in the first part of his life he knew who he was, He was all about, I'm going to beat the best that's ever been. Once he'd achieved that and he'd done it all, he then sort of loses his character. He doesn't quite know, who am I now? He's like, his identity's lost because all those legends have retired, and what's left is a guy who has no one else to beat. So there was the internal power struggle of the mind in the second act. What I'm trying to work out is, are we in the third act of Randy Orton's career? Have we just begun it, which is what this storyline is suggesting? If we haven't, why are they bringing legends back into the storyline this way? I personally don't think we're at the third act yet. I think there's a lot of engine left to go in the tank of Randy Orton. I think he's got so much energy and much more to give the business. I wouldn't be pushing him towards that. Unless Randy's asked them, I wouldn't personally be doing it just yet. I would have had the feud with Edge. Maybe that was the end of the legend-killing character. Maybe that was the whole point. That was the end of Act 2, if you like. He's been through this cycle of the Viper. He's returned to ending that act by becoming the legend killer again. You know, he's beat one of his old foes, which never should happen anyway. It doesn't make sense, but fine. The third act, therefore, is about starting you off with these reminiscent, nostalgic moments from the past, which may be what we've seen on Night of Champions. We've revisited Randy Orton's origin story, which is the legend killer, and now we're on this path to conclusion. Now, if that's the way they're doing it, that actually follows the traditional movie trilogy narrative of 3 acts. I'm not happy with it, but maybe that's the way they're doing this. If it's not, like I said, I think that using these legends the way that they have, it's just too early for me personally. I think it's way too early to be visiting stuff like that in Randy Orton's character. I still believe that he's missing the attitude of like a Stone Cold Steve Austin. I tried to say this last week, and you know, my thoughts have evolved since then as I've rerun what I thought and what I said. I just wish that Randy Orton was given a figurehead to be angry at. Whether it's an authority, a group, or just a single person, Randy needs something to be angry at and mad about in order to advance his character any further. Just being angry at Drew McIntyre is not going to cut the mustard. I think what I would do, and I think the best way to conclude Randy Orton's character, is to make him go full cycle. He was the legend killer, but I would make him be the legend that gets killed. I would take Randy Orton's character, and now I would develop him into a bitter man who's become a legend. Everyone recognizes he's a future Hall of Famer, where he's like, I used to be the legend killer, now I'm dying. Now my life's falling apart. My career is coming to an end. And I want, that should fuel anger. That should fuel the madness within him. I'm going to finish on my terms, doing it the way I want to do it. And I'm going to finish as the best wrestler in the world today and of all time. So that's the attitude that I really want him to have. I'd love it if WE did that. I doubt they listen to the Wrestling Journal just yet. So I highly doubt that they'll be doing that with his character, but I hope that that's the way that they take him. And that means that he needs another couple of title runs. He would be one of the few wrestlers that I would finish his career on top. I don't know whether Randy would be okay with that, but I would pitch it to him and say, in 5 years' time, we want you to retire, and we want you to retire with the belt. Because that's how this goes full circle. Or you can do it the other way, and you can actually turn Randy face with the fans to end his career, and you can have him lose to the new stars. You could actually have somebody who comes in and beats the legend, Randy Orton. Because that takes the whole story full circle. So that's what I would do. Overall, though, he hasn't changed. He is still an incredible wrestler. One of the top 20 wrestlers in the world of all time. He's 12th on my list, but he could be more. There's always going to be that extra bit of potential that I think he could have got out of himself had he have pushed himself a little bit harder, or had WE written the story of his life a little bit better and just take him in the right path with the next evolution of his character. So my hope is that they'll do that and that he'll go to the next level. If not, he's going to be a Hall of Famer. It's not a bad career. So now that we've looked at the re-review, let's move on to the main event, the review. This week, we've got a very special wrestler, very close to my heart, somebody that I was excited. When I first came up with the idea of the Wrestling Journal, this was one of the wrestlers that I wanted to address very early on because of the controversy, the relevance to modern wrestling. I think a lot of this guy's character and a lot of his experience from the past really reaches both forwards and backwards in the conversation of people who love wrestling and how it used to be, but people who love wrestling now and what it's going to become. So without further ado, let's introduce this week's subject. He was the face of WCW in the Attitude Era, a Hall of Famer, a WCW Tag Team Champion, a 2 times World Heavyweight Champion, a 2-time Universal Champion. He's next. It is Goldberg. So now that we've done my little intro to who it is, of course, Bill Goldberg, whatever you want to call him, this is the guy that we're going to be talking about in this episode. To do that, as always, I found out what are the best 3 matches of said wrestler's career. With Randy Orton, I looked at 3 matches. Same with Kevin Nash in episode 1. With Goldberg, I'm going to look at 3 matches that are arguably his best of all time in his career. They all come from WCW. So what I'm going to do is I'll read you the title of the pay-per-view or the event that this match happened. I'll tell you the opponent. And then I'm also going to give you the score out of 10 that I gave for the match. After I've done all that, we'll go into actually reviewing the matches themselves. And all of that information then helps me to decide what I'm going to score them as a wrestler when we go through the character and persona review. So the first of the 3 matches, WCW Nitro 1998, of course, for the World Heavyweight Championship against Hulk Hogan. I gave that one 8.5 out of 10. The second match from WCW Halloween Havoc 1998 is against DDP for the World Heavyweight Championship, and I gave that one an 8.5 out of 10. Finally, the third match is from Fall Brawl 2000 against Scott Steiner in a no disqualification match, and I gave that one 8 out of 10. Okay, so let's jump back to Nitro 1998. This was a period of time in my life that really resonates. I miss this time. I miss this period in my life so much because I remember how over wrestling was, how good it was to watch. It was just so entertaining, and there was always something happening. You could flick channels. If you were slightly bored with one program, there was always something else happening on the other channel that would just satiate everything that you had in your being, and you just loved it as a wrestling fan. You were always happy with the product on your TV. For me, Nitro really became a staple of my viewing. I watched more WCW than WWE until about 99, and that's when I started switching to WWE. Basically, once I found out about Vince Russo moving to WCW, I then switched to WWE because everything just started getting ridiculous. It was already getting bad at that point, but it just got even worse when Vince was in charge. But this was at a point where Goldberg had been on a streak of like 170-something matches unbeaten. Never heard of him pro wrestling before, although I think it actually technically was. There were plenty of wrestlers who've been unbeaten for years and years before this, but Goldberg actually had the number next to his name, so it resonated a lot more. It was more sports-like to have that kind of record, and so I think that really helped Goldberg get over. And it was just Goldberg. Guy was a mammoth. Everybody loved him. He looked he looked as badass as he fought, and that made him popular. So here are my notes then as I went through this match and watched it on the network. Crowd of over 40,000 people for a Nitro. That was huge to me. Every time I look at the stadium and you look at the shots panning through the audience, it is incredible to see 40,000 people there, because you didn't see that on a Monday night. I mean, for us in England, it was a Friday night. We used to get all of our wrestling was on Fridays. We never got it live, unfortunately. Or we did eventually when wrestling became super popular. we finally got it live. But for the longest time, we had to watch on a Friday night. It was the Friday Night Wars in the UK. You just never saw it. I never saw WCW because we also didn't really have access to WCW pay-per-views. I never saw that big WrestleMania stadium feel in WCW. Even at Starrcade, there was something that didn't feel majestic the way that WrestleMania did. But this Nitro was the first time in WCW where I legitimately felt like I was watching a spectacle that I was never going to forget. Clearly, this was a Warrior versus Hogan Part 2. I've never actually said that or thought that before. Maybe I should have, because I'm sure there are going to be people here saying that's obvious. Goldberg had won the biggest minor title in the company with the US Championship. Hogan was the actual champion. Goldberg was this new monster that had come in and reached new heights of popularity in wrestling. And Hogan was the stalwart at the top of the company. Like, there are so many parallels to the Warrior Hogan first match that it kind of makes me realize Hogan sold this as Warrior Hogan Part 2. He must have. There's no doubt in my mind the more I watch it, because I just realized that this match is what Warrior and Hogan was back in the 90s. So, in the early 90s. And that was a match that really got me into wrestling, Warrior Hogan. That was one of my first memories, watching that match in its entirety and just falling in love with the Ultimate Warrior as a character. And there were so many parallels, and I'll go through those in the notes as we move forward. But this was definitely a Warrior versus Hogan take 2. Everyone's excited, peak wrestling fandom. If you ever want an example of how over wrestling was during the Attitude Era, this is one of the matches to watch. The way that the crowd react to like every little thing, whether it's the entrances of the wrestlers, particularly Hulk Hogan coming out in heels, like they would interact with the heels majorly. You could almost feel the hatred of the fans to the wrestlers and also the love of the fans to the other wrestlers, depending on whether they were a heel or a face. Wrestlers would constantly be attacking fans trying to get in the ring, particularly during WCW. And it was because they'd riled up the fans so much. It was believable. People loved it. They were passionate for it. Enough that they were willing to try and attack the very people that they watched each week. It was just an insane time in wrestling. Bobby Heenan, selling perfectly, builds and justifies the match, legitimizes why we're here, what's going on. It's all about the NWO wanting to take over, and Goldberg is the shining beacon of hope. The last remnant, almost, of hope for WCW to be successful, and Bobby Heenan just really sells that well. Bobby doesn't talk on the commentary as much as the other guys, Tony Schiavone, Mike Tenay, whoever it is. But Bobby's the best one on the mic, bar none. I'm not a big fan of Tony Schiavone and Mike Tenay in WCW, and I'll go into that later, but Larry Zbyszko I didn't mind, but I always preferred Bobby Heenan as the commentator. He was the one to me who legitimized commentary in WCW. Then there was the infamous Hogan, I'm going to kick Goldberg's awkward pause, but on TV when he entered. I always found that weird because I was just like, he clearly wanted to say ass and then realised that he'd get in trouble or fined for saying the word ass. So he had to switch it at the very last second to a more family-friendly terminology, and that was what he used. I was like, come on, dude. You're in the Attitude Era and you're using the word but. Stone Cold 316 says, I just whipped your butt. I mean, it just doesn't have the same ring to it. Hogan was like that. I think that may have been one of the negative effects of working in WE when he did. He was so WFized that he just used to think everything was PG. And the NWO brought in this idea that you can have more attitude and realism. But where they failed was that once they felt pressure from WF in the ratings, they reverted back to what they knew, which was WF in the mid-90s, which was really dull, really boring, and not fun to watch at all, and treated fans like idiots. The minute they did that, that's when WCW fell apart, and they did it because they didn't have enough creativity to know where to go after the NWO idea hit home. There was an immediate lockup for the cameras, which was kind of funny. WCW used to do this thing at the beginning of matches where, especially Hogan, you'll watch it in the match with Jay Leno. Jay Leno gets Hogan in like a wrist lock, and he holds the wrist lock and walks around the ring with Hogan in a wrist lock for this ridiculous amount of time. Just unrealistic for someone the size of Hogan, who would have just absolutely belted Leno. They just spent too long doing it, but it was for the cameras. It was for all of those journalists at ringside to take photos so that they could get it in the newspaper the next day. WCW did that often. They do that here. Goldberg gets Hogan in a headlock, and it just goes on for like 20 seconds too long. And it's because he's waiting for journalists to just get the shots in, get the pictures you want. Goldberg's dominating Hogan. There you go. The story's told. You already know who's going to win the match based on the beginning. Okay, Hogan's pace is a perfect slowdown. We all know this. Hogan works slow. He's not the fastest worker in the business. He only really ever speeds up when he's going to finish the match and win. But Hogan's pace, or lack thereof, countered Goldberg's style perfectly. And when I say countered, I actually mean it balanced it out. It took the power and the speed, this massive burst of electric power and pace that Goldberg possessed, and it just pulled the reins in on it. And it allowed you to get invested in the story without feeling like, I'm bored now. I'm losing what's going on. Hogan was really, really good at just taking his time, and he would do things that took time to delay so that you were still watching and interested, but nothing was actually happening in the match. It was just Hogan walking around or selling the story itself rather than a move or anything that had physically happened to him. Hogan lets Goldberg show his power multiple times as well. And this all goes into the point I made about selling. Hogan was purposely letting Goldberg beat him in these small, like there was the lockup at the beginning of the match, but they locked up with the fingers. You know when you do like, I think we used to call it peanuts. That was the game it was called. I don't know what anybody else calls it, but we called it peanuts, where you interlock both of your hands' fingers together. And the idea is to see who can overpower the other person and cripple the other person's hand. Goldberg and Hogan do this, and Goldberg is winning very comfortably. And it's just these little displays of power. The other thing was shoulder tackles. Goldberg would bump Hogan. Hogan would go flying out of the ring. Hogan would just fly across the ring, or he'd go out the ring on purpose because he'd been bumped. And the idea was just to tell you this story that Goldberg's younger, he's faster, he's stronger, and Hogan is scared of him. And they're building that intensity up by taking bumps, by Hogan continually getting knocked down on all these little sections of moves that normally Hogan would win. It just started to reinforce the story that Goldberg is winning this match. He's the one in control. And what was incredible that Hogan does so well is throughout all of that, Hogan's in control of everything. He's the one actually leading this match, even though you know that Goldberg's winning. Goldberg could sell, but he wasn't consistent. That was my next note. Goldberg was very good at doing these little weird twitches with his head when he got punched. And I used to love that because it really built into the character of Goldberg being this psycho tank who essentially, he could feel pain, but he had this way of turning it very quickly into an offense and power. And it was like he absorbed it, and then he would use that to generate his next move himself. And he did that really well, but he didn't sell it all the time. There were multiple times where Goldberg would be punched or kicked, and he would literally not respond. And you'd just be like, does Goldberg know he just got kicked or not? Does he know that he just got punched in the face and he was supposed to sell that? One of the faults of Goldberg was that he just didn't sell consistently, but when he did, he sold really well. I just wish he'd done it more. This is part of him being green in the business. He just didn't understand the importance to remember to sell everything. Anytime you're attacked, sell it. Don't no-sell anything. And actually take the time to show people and demonstrate that you can actually be hurt. The amount that you can be hurt, well, that's a different story, but just let us know that you can feel pain, because that's really important when it comes to selling the moves that are going against you. But it also legitimizes the story that's trying to be told in the ring. So when there's a massive bump on Goldberg, we need to believe that this really could be the end of the match. But if Goldberg never takes the big hit, if he never feels big pain, how are we ever going to believe that he's going to lose the match? And that was one of the problems that he had in his career that WCW could have rectified, but they ignorantly didn't touch it, didn't respond to it, didn't help you understand any of his character like that. It was such a shame that they didn't develop that part of Goldberg's character. Hogan using the strap, adding to that coward story that Hogan was going to use any means necessary to win. I think he used the belt at this point because it was obvious he wasn't winning any of the smaller duels that they were having in the match. This was like Hogan saying, okay, I got to break the rules now. I've got to just start doing whatever I can to get an advantage in this match. So that was a really cool little thing. Goldberg, when he had the chance to use the strap, which often happened against Hogan, the babyface would often get an opportunity to retaliate with the strap or whatever it was Hogan had. And it was just a way of saying, like, the babyface, you made them so mad by cheating that now they're going to get retribution. But this time when Goldberg had the opportunity, he just throws the belt out the ring, throws the weight belt, and he's like, I don't need that to beat you. It was really good from Goldberg. I assume Hogan thought of it, but it was a really good bit of storytelling. And again, it just reinforced what we were beginning to see time and time again, which was Goldberg is dominating this match. This is Goldberg's time, and nothing is going to stand in his way from his legacy and his future. Knocking Goldberg down worried the fans. Straight after the belt stuff, Hogan hits you with this like swerve, and he's like, actually, you think that this is going one way, but I'm just going to throw a spanner in the works that makes you not sure about how you feel this match is going to go. So I like the fact that Hogan tried to just divert people's attention. Straight after all of this stuff happened with Goldberg dominating, Hogan was smart enough to say, hold on, I've still got power as well. I still have the ability to beat you. I'm Hulk Hogan. I can beat you. So I like that Hogan threw that in. I think they needed a little bit more than they actually gave us in the match, but adding it in was just for the psychology of the match to help us understand, okay, this isn't a sure done deal that Goldberg's going to win. There is a chance here that Hogan might win this match. Hogan milking the time delays, really good. Love that. Hogan, whether he was a babyface or a heel, was really good at delaying and showing frustration and just overemphasizing his emotions so that the fans could clearly see how he was feeling at that moment in time in the match. As the babyface Hulk Hogan, he did it all the time. Especially when I look back at like the Warrior match, he would like always be on his knees and he would slap the canvas when he was frustrated he hadn't managed to get a pin. But then as the heel, I love the way that he would just get out the ring. I really thought he did heel tactics really, really well. It comes from earlier in his career. He knew what he was doing. It was always good to see him do that. And it sells the story. That's the important part. Okay, Hennig comes out, which signaled the beginning of the end of the match. Very, very, very bad camera timing. You actually miss the kick out from Goldberg after receiving 2 leg drops from Hogan. When I watched this back, I was shocked that the cameraman, whoever was directing, forgot to go back to the ring to watch the pin. Also, the commentators didn't do a very good job of emphasizing the fact that Hogan did 2 leg drops. This is one of the reasons that I'm not the biggest fan of Tony Schiavone and Mike Tenay, because they're not very good at selling the story. If you hear it back, the commentators, they realize what's happened when it's too late. So when they try to big up the story and give you this massive ending that you've just missed, this finish that Goldberg's miraculously kicked out of 2 leg drops, it was already over before they started selling it. So it was too late and it was lost on you as somebody watching. Crazy crowd. After DDP comes out with Malone and all that stuff's going on, Goldberg nails the spear. The minute the spear's nailed, boy oh boy, the crowd absolutely pop. And then of course, up for the jackhammer and down for the victory for Goldberg. I don't usually like giving the results away of these matches in my reviews, but that's what happened. Goldberg 98 had the best finisher in the business. There was no one that could kick out of the jackhammer. The way they sold that finisher was the way that all finishers should be sold. It should be the move that ends the match. And on the very, very rarest of occasions, somebody manages to get out of it. So that was the first of the 3 matches. Let's move on to the second one, which is Halloween Havoc 98 versus Diamond Dallas Page. The first thing I noticed was that the WCW commentary was poor at building and selling the storyline and the importance of the match. Again, I mentioned this in the last match review, where I said that the WCW commentators were pretty bad. They were just really poor, and they sucked at being able to really build something. You had DDP, who was supposed to be the man of the people, versus Goldberg, who was this indestructible tank of a machine. And they didn't even sell the story. They sort of got halfway through telling us what it meant to be the people's champion. And it was like, okay, great. No drama, no emotion, no poignancy in their voice. They didn't emphasize at the right moments. Shivani is terrible at emphasizing the importance of certain statements. He's really bad at it. One of the worst, actually. So everything he says kind of feels the same. He's very monotone in that sense. And for a wrestling commentator, what they needed was the color commentator. Bobby Heenan was not the color commentator for this WCW setup. He should have been the JR of this team. What they needed was a third person to come in instead of Mike Tenay or even Tony Schiavone. Somebody who could deliver the color commentary and add that charisma that was needed to blow something up, who had really good timing on the mic to be able to sell what was going on in the ring at that particular time. So they did a terrible job of starting this match, and it really sets the stall out for you as the viewer. When the commentator's bad, you lose interest in the match that you're watching, no matter how good the match is or will be. Goldberg had the most highly anticipated entrance in all of wrestling. The only person I could say comes close is The Undertaker on a consistent basis. I know that they piped in the Goldberg chants. I know that all that was, Eric Bischoff trying to make it sound bigger than it was. But there really was nothing better than watching Goldberg walk out to the ring, accompanied by 50 random guys who were all over the age of 60 who never would have been able to defend him anyway. And who cares if they could or couldn't defend him, because it was Goldberg. But it was always fun to watch that. It was just fun to see this ridiculous entourage they probably got from the old people's home in whatever town at the time. I even remember in one of the matches that I watched, I think it was the next one of the police who's escorting Goldberg trips over a wire and makes himself look like a fool. And I'm just like, you're expecting us to believe that these guys are going to protect Goldberg? He can't even walk without being beaten by a wire on the floor. So I always enjoyed that, but obviously we then go into the pyrotechnics, we've got the smoke. It was just Goldberg really sold his entrance really well. He just looked like a badass guy, and he said it in interviews himself. His job was to go to the ring, do business, and leave. And that's what he did, and you believed it. He looked like a guy who was completely focused on the match as he entered the ring. He was no nonsense. Yes, he did a bit of the choreographed entrance stuff in the pyro, but it made sense to the character they were trying to build. This was a guy who was completely focused. It became a religious repetition. And anybody who's been in professional sports knows that religious repetition is important. And Goldberg did that in his entrances. That was what his repetition was, to do that same entrance the same way, time and time again, to bang his head on the door, to walk out to the ring in that way, to then stop in the pyro, to then snort out the smoke and do his little dance, the psycho dance stuff that he did. It wasn't a dance, but whatever that was. All of that stuff was religious to him, and he did it every time. So it made sense, even though it looked a little bit too intense. Strong backstory, DDP got Goldberg a job. This is what I was referring to when I said that the commentary was bad at the beginning of the match itself. Here's a guy who got Goldberg into the business of professional wrestling. You think that they would have mentioned this at the beginning in the build-up to the match. And yet here we are, we don't hear any of it until this point in my notes, which is literally minutes into the entrances. And this is what I was saying, how bad the commentators were. Instead of actually building this up before the match, we've got a guy come into the ring who introduced Bill Goldberg to wrestling. Before either guy come out, we should be hearing this storyline, a People's Champion versus WCW's Warrior. And you might not say Warrior because of the connotations with the Ultimate Warrior, but WCW's Standard Bearer versus the People's Champion. Both of them loved in and out of the ring because they stand for everything that is right with wrestling in WCW. They're here to fight the bad guys and they represent us, the people. And here they are coming head to head against each other. What a match we're in store for. They just didn't build any of that. And I'm not a good promo. I'm no good at this stuff. And yet even I sound better than the WCW commentators when it comes to actually building the anticipation for how important this story was. DDP had a game plan. Great story building from DDP. I cannot tell you how great a match this was for Diamond Dallas Page. He leads the match the same way as Hogan led the match in the last review, and he does a great job of it. Builds the story. It shows that he'd thought about the match. In one of the previous episodes, I alluded to this idea that wrestlers should always, if you're going to make something sports-based, you've got to say and mention sports reality. Now, a reality sports situation was actually something that Mike Tenay came out with in the middle of the match. He talks about DDP doing some moves on Goldberg. And in the middle of one of the moves, Tenay says he's clearly been watching tapes all week. He knows every move. He knows how to get out of things. That was the kind of story that needed to be told. And they never emphasized it after that. Mike Tenay was good at those very short one-liners that were very technical based, but he just wasn't a very good commentator overall. But for DDP, it just reinforced the story that DDP was telling in the ring, which was, I've studied you, I know who you are because I brought you into the business, and I'm going to beat you because I am the only one in this company that knows everything about you. And that really sold great from DDP's perspective. I believed it, I was sold on it, and I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen next in the match because of it. It was the first time I remembered watching Goldberg thinking, I think he's going to lose this match. This was a much faster pace than the Hogan match. DDP was working his ass off in this one. He was taking all the bumps. The way that DDP would throw himself out of the ring to emphasize like a Goldberg push was phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, you've got to watch this. The way that DDP will go through the middle rope backwards onto the outside of the ring. Unbelievable. Really good storytelling. Just did a great job at making Goldberg look powerful. And also the way he reacted. Once he was out of the ring, he would get back to his feet, be frustrated. But he did it in a way that was a babyface. He didn't do it like Hogan, who was like a cowardly frustration. DDP looked like he was more determined to do better when he got back in the ring. Really good psychology from DDP. Goldberg's moves were always so powerful. Has anyone been as strong in the ring as Goldberg? I genuinely can't think of anyone who's looked as strong as Goldberg in the ring. When Goldberg was at his peak, you just knew that he could outpower anyone, including people like The Big Show. The Giant was huge, and yet you knew that Goldberg was more powerful. There was something about him that you just thought, he's not going to lose to the Giant. It's Goldberg. Look at the size of those traps. I love Goldberg's moves as well. He was excellent at selling moves, making them look powerful, like they actually hurt. And I know some people will be like, well, that's because they probably did hurt. No, they didn't. These were really well executed moves. They weren't always perfect, but they were executed safely. The spear into the turnbuckle looked great. Really justified the slowdown in pace. Everything about this match was really fun and engaging. I haven't mentioned at this point the fact that in real life, if you were watching on pay-per-view, the stream had cut short, and so the whole match was ruined for you. But We're obviously watching this one on the network, so we've got the best of hindsight. It was a great match, really good to watch at this point. And like I said, storytelling was brilliant. You hadn't really seen this spot with a spear at that point. Somebody being able to outwit the spear itself, because the spear was so devastating, fast and powerful. It was just like hard to get out of. And for DDP to move at the last minute, it played brilliantly into DDP's game plan. He'd showed us all the way through the match that he was going to reverse moves of Goldberg because he'd studied him so much. So this just re-emphasized the intelligence of DDP and how much he'd been looking at and watching Goldberg's moves. Great selling on the injured shoulder after the second spear from Goldberg. So obviously hitting the turnbuckle and the corner post, that was bad enough. But when Goldberg successfully speared DDP, he holds his arm and shoulder immediately. Brilliant. Didn't forget to do it. And this is what I was saying. When Goldberg sells, it is really good selling, but he just doesn't always remember to do it. If he could have remembered to sell every time, he really would have been over, and it would help justify that first loss. The crowd popped hard on the Diamond Cutter. They were clearly into the match, but this match reminded me a lot of the Shawn Michaels-Diesel feud, where Shawn Michaels was a heel, but then went so over during the match that he became the babyface by the end of it. DDP wasn't the heel at the beginning of the match, but he certainly wasn't the top babyface. He almost got to that point, and he'd earned it, and the fans knew it, I knew it watching. He'd done so much work in this match that you couldn't help but love DDP by the end of it. You just respected him, and you kind of thought, if he wins, I'm not going to be mad. And this is where I think WCW dropped the ball. This was the right sort of time for Goldberg to lose a match, because the fans actually wouldn't have cared if Goldberg had lost. I mean, of course, they'd be a little bit upset, but it would have been to someone who was deserving of the title. And when he did the Diamond Cutter, the crowd went ballistic. They loved it. It was an awesome false finish as well, just to add that to what I've just said about the fans popping. I mean, you really felt like that could be the end of the match, and the fans wouldn't have cared less. Goldberg did a great job on the finish, selling the jackhammer. His arm clearly still hurt, and of course, struggled to pick DDP up at one point. Just a great bit of selling. Again, when Goldberg sells, he sells right. This is the reason I think he ended up being asked to be in the Universal Soldier movie, because they clearly watched him and thought, oh, he can act, like he can make this look believable. I know that there were connections with Universal, and I get all that, so that made it easier, but Goldberg could at least act. He showed that he knew how to pretend he was hurt and make it look like he actually was. So that was a great match, one of my favourite Goldberg matches of all time, and I would recommend anybody to watch it when you can. Let's go into the third match now. Third match was at Fall Brawl 2000 against Scott Steiner in that no DQ match. This one started with commentating, annoying commentary, boring, peeing me off. It puts a downer on a match that you're looking forward to, and that is the worst thing that a commentator can do. Commentator's job is to build the match and make you more excited for it. Hopefully you're already excited about it anyway, but their job is to elevate the significance and the importance of the match you're about to watch. When a commentator degrades that match, when they don't sell the match properly, immediately your expectations lower, because psychologically it affects you in a negative way. Steiner starting on the Buffalo Bills, that was a really good thing. I love that. The Buffalo Bills, some of the players were on the side watching from ringside, and Steiner immediately goes up to them in his own entrance, and he just slags them off, gives them a bit of smack talk. It's great. It's good to watch that. I love it when wrestlers engage with the audience. I think it's really important. It helps to get the audience involved in the match. Emotionally, they relate. I relate to the Buffalo Bills by watching it, because I see myself as a good guy fan. So if I'm not supporting Steiner and he says something to me, I'm going to give him some back as well. So it just helps on a psychological level to just deepen the relationship between the wrestler and the fan. Both of these guys look jacked. I don't know about steroids. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not even going to make any insinuations, but boy, these two are jacked. Maybe I did just make an insinuation. Let's just pretend I didn't. But both of these guys are ripped. It makes me feel like, you know, when you watch movies sometimes, I'll watch like Rocky movies and it makes me want to work out because I just look at the guys and I feel so inferior that I'm just like, I need to go and do some push-ups at the end of this movie. That's how I felt watching this match. I was like, geez, I'm out of shape. I've got to get in shape. These guys, look at these two. So both of those guys psychologically destroying me on my own self-confidence. The Guerrilla press to front shoulder slam is great. When Goldberg does this move, I always popped. It just looked great. When he held you up in the Guerrilla position and then did the front power slam, I loved it. Looks so unique and different to stuff that you'd seen. Everyone was used to the Guerrilla press slam or the Guerrilla throw or the drop. To see that, it was power on another level. And I loved the ease at which Goldberg picked up Scott Steiner. It just looked phenomenal. At this point as well, we're in 2000, so Goldberg had 3 years of experience behind him in the ring, and you could see that experience come into the fore. He was much smoother with his power moves, and that made it look even better. The butterfly underhook suplex looked great as well. He did that more or less straight after. Another move that just looked absolutely phenomenal. Goldberg does not get enough credit for the moves that he does, and I'll go into that when we review his figures, but he had some great looking moves. His moveset is one of my favorites of all wrestlers because he just did things that were different at that time in wrestling, and they look legit, they look badass, it looked like it hurt, and that's what you wanted to see. This match is all about power, and it's great. Both guys, powerful boys in the ring, using their muscles to get over each other. This was the wrestling match equivalent of Dutch meeting his mate in the beginning of Predator, where him and, I can't even remember his name now, the big black dude who plays Apollo Creed, when those two do the big handshake and their muscles are tensed at the beginning of Predator, that was the equivalent of this match in wrestling terms. It was like these two big beefy guys trying to outfight each other and prove who's got the bigger muscles, who's got more power. Really good, raw, powerful match to watch. Goldberg messed up the turnbuckle spot here, did the spear, should have gone into the ring post, but didn't go anywhere near it. In fact, it didn't even look like he hit the turnbuckle. Really bad sell, and especially on a match where power and impact and physicality are the things that you're trying to sell. It's really important that you actually hit the turnbuckle when you meant to go into it, or the ring post, or whatever it is. Goldberg bleeding, though, was very rare for me. I don't remember many matches where I saw Goldberg bleed. A little hint here, if you go back to the entrance of Goldberg, he's walking with the entourage. He reaches into his tights, pulls out some piece of paper, and he throws it on the floor. At first I thought, why would anybody with a sane mind put chewing gum down their pants and then pick it out and chew it? And then what I realized when he was bleeding was, of course, what he did, he was putting the blade or whatever he used to cut himself down his pants. So that was a bit naive from Goldberg, but because he didn't bleed often, that's probably why he did this. He didn't think the cameras are on me right now and they can see what I'm doing. But it was very obvious that he's putting the blade, preparing it, and gets rid of whatever paper was surrounding it. Maybe it felt uncomfortable for him, so he just threw the paper out. He does that and you can blatantly see it. So when this spot happened with the blood, I knew exactly what he was doing at the beginning of the match. Oh, here we go. The rubber baseball bat. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. If there is anything as bad as Vince Russo, if anything demonstrates the idiocy of this guy and how bad he was at booking, just watch the rubber baseball bat. When Vince Russo comes down to the ring, that's bad enough. Because I don't believe that Vince Russo could hurt a fly. He's one of those dudes that, like, I know I could beat up myself. If I saw him and we were going to have a fight, I know I'd beat him up. So when he comes down to the ring, I'm just like, I've already lost credibility in this match. You've ruined it, Vince. Stay away. The female lady came down, Medusa or something. I can't remember what they called her, but She came down to the ring. I wasn't really watching WCW at this point, so I didn't know all of the names for people. She came down. She was clearly Scott Steiner's valet. That was fine. Let her do all of those spots, but don't let Vince Russo come down. It didn't make sense. And then when he hit him with the baseball bat, and the baseball bat literally bends around the back of Goldberg, it was just embarrassing. It was so stupid, and you could see it was a fake bat. Good improv on the broken table spot from Goldberg. That was my next note. Basically what happened was they were going to do a table spot. One of the legs broke on the table, and the table wouldn't stand up right when they tried to set it up. So one half of it just dropped on the floor, so it essentially formed a triangle. Good work from Steiner and Goldberg just to improvise and say, okay, we can't do the normal spot. We've got to adjust this. And they adjusted it really well, and it still broke the table. It still looked impactful, still looked like it hurt. They did a good job. There was an awful looking recliner that happened after this. The Steiner recliner wasn't my favorite move. It looked pretty powerful, but when done badly, when Steiner didn't sit properly on the opponent, and when the opponent didn't arch their back properly, the move looked worthless. And that's what happened in this match with Goldberg. It absolutely didn't sell the move, and it looked stupid and pathetic. A really competitive match. Really loved how this was going. I was pleasantly surprised by this match and how competitive it was. I didn't expect it to be as good as this. In the year 2000, WCW, Goldberg and Steiner, it was just a really good match. Came together really well, and they sold everything the way they should. The weapon spots were too much. It just felt like, I get that this is Goldberg, I get that he's a monster and he's going to be hard to beat, but they were hitting him with the weapon and it wasn't connecting because they were trying so hard. Vince Russo and the lady on the ring, there was one point where she hit him with a lead pipe and it didn't even hit him. You're ruining the match. Let Steiner, I know it's no DQ, but Steiner doesn't need you. He can use the weapons himself. Like, let him do it because it's going to look more believable. For me, a manager can get away with interfering twice in a match and that's it. After that, it's too much, and that happened way too much in this match. That was the one negative, and that's why I gave this one an 8 out of 10. This would have been better had they not have had the interference, or if it had just been the woman a couple of times with the lead pipe, that would have been fine. The overhead suplex looked dangerous, and this one was the overhead superplex. This was the one from the top rope that Steiner gave to Goldberg. So this one's on Steiner, and it looked like Goldberg landed on his head. It was the only really bad move in the match that I saw where I was like, oh my gosh, they've messed that up. Goldberg did seem legitimately hurt. I don't think he landed on his head, but it looked bad, and he definitely looked hurt after it. It was a really brutal feeling to the match as well because of incidents like that, because of the table earlier, the use of the weapons. Steiner was throwing Goldberg into the stanchions on the side a lot as well. It was really good. It just had that really tough feel to it. My final note repeats what I'd said earlier. This was a great match, but the interference, particularly from Vince Russo, ruined what would have been a really, really good match. Typical of the time, Vince Russo getting involved too much. The guy, Ed Ferrara or whatever his name was on commentary, absolute idiot. Didn't like his commentary work at all. Clearly thought more of himself than he actually was a good commentator. He was terrible. He was just like an average to bad commentator, but he thought he was a legendary commentator. Somebody who's similar to that at the moment is Excalibur. Oh my gosh, that guy, he is the new Ed Ferrara to me. Talks as though he thinks he's the best commentator in the business. Sounds like the worst. So there you go, guys. That's the review of the 3 matches. We have been through all of those. And now we can move on to the main event, which is the actual wrestler review. Before we start the review itself, I haven't usually done this, but with Goldberg, I think it's really important because, as I've said, this is a very controversial wrestler, somebody who spans different generations now. He's come into modern wrestling to sign a 2-match-a-year deal or whatever it is with WWE. And so we're seeing him on our screens. Not only that, but he's winning big titles. He's won the Universal title twice since being back. And wrestling fans have a very polarizing opinion of Goldberg. So I just want to address some of the things that I've noticed, particularly online, when there are conversations about Goldberg. Some of them good, some of them bad. But I feel like this is the right moment for me just to go into some of these opinions before we move on and then go into the actual stats and the figures that we've given Goldberg for his rating. The first one is the match time myth. And people will know what I'm talking about here, because everyone says it. Oh, Bill Goldberg, he only ever does 2-minute matches. He's never wrestled more than 5 minutes. I purposely timed the 3 matches that I reviewed. And yes, these are arguably his best matches, so they're going to be longer than most of them. But let me just tell you that in the 3 that I watched, bearing in mind the timing in his career as well of each match, the first match against Hogan was an 8 minutes 20 second match, which actually is, I'll happily accept, is a pathetic short match for a title match. It should have been at least double that for a normal wrestler. The second match was the match against DDP, and that went above 10 minutes. That was actually 10 minutes and 25 seconds. That's a more than 10-minute match. Now, most fans say that Goldberg's never had a match over 10 minutes, which, if you're listening and you've said that, just shut up and swallow that humble pie right now. The final one against Scott Steiner was 13 minutes and 20 seconds. And I'm telling you now, these were good matches. The reason I've given them 0.5 is because of how over the fans were. As a standalone wrestling match, each one I would have thought was an 8 out of 10. But because of the way the fans responded, I had to add an extra half a point, because that just elevated the whole thing and how it felt. But let me tell you, these were good matches, and Goldberg could actually wrestle longer than 5 minutes and do a good match. So for every numbskull that wants to jump on that bandwagon, just know that the wheels have fallen off years ago. When he was in WCW, he was doing this more. And remember, the order that I've just read out chronologically, the shortest match he had for the title was against Hogan, and it progressively got longer. Why? Because he began to learn the business. He began to learn about wrestling and what he was doing in the ring. He began to understand nuances and psychology. So he understood, oh, I've got to slow down at times. I've got to take my time, sell moves more, and actually allow the match to grow and develop, to tell the story that we want it to tell. I think the problem is that a lot of people remember his match against Brock Lesnar, and they always go back to that at WrestleMania 20. And that was a longer match, which was just like, this is a bore fest. But that wasn't boring because it was a bad match. That was boring because you knew they were leaving and everyone was mad at them. And they were angry at the fans. It was just a pure angry match. And that's why it was a mess. It was nothing to do with the fact that Goldberg couldn't go or tell the story long enough. And that was the problem I think Goldberg had. The reason his matches were short were because he was all business. Had he had the passion of someone like a Ric Flair, I've got no doubt he would have wanted to stay in the ring longer because he would have loved what he was doing. That's why his matches were short. He just didn't love what he was doing at first. He grew into that. The more he got the spotlight, the more passion he had for the business, and he started trying to learn more about ring psychology, about being a babyface, about getting crowd reactions, how to carry a story. He was learning all of this while he was carrying the title. The second thing I want to talk about is the myth of the streak. Now, this is the one that really rattles my bones. When I hear people online saying, Goldberg's streak was fake, there was no such thing. He actually only won 35 matches on television. BS. You don't know what you're talking about. I watched this on the Monday Night Wars documentary, and there's the specific episode on Goldberg. And even then, you've got idiots on there saying, oh, we all knew that the streak was made up. I think even Edge says it at one point. He's like, oh, he jumped 1 week, 15 wins. No, he didn't. Secondly, there's something called house shows that were going on between Nitros, and Goldberg was at those house shows having matches. There's a great article that this guy does. He was a guy like me, Goldberg fan, who wanted to know, is the streak legitimate? Because I believed it was. I remember when I was younger, about 5 or 6, maybe even 10 years ago, somewhere in this time period, I remember going onto YouTube and just searching for Goldberg matches. I just wanted to watch Goldberg matches. And within that time, I was like, I've probably watched about 70 or 80 matches here. You know, and this was like YouTube Safari. I wasn't looking. I was just sort of getting lost in YouTube, and whatever match came up next with Goldberg, I would watch. I wasn't really intentionally or chronologically working my way through. And so when it got to that point, I was like, okay, I've watched about 60, 70 or 80 matches, somewhere in that region. That's what, 100 matches off of what Goldberg's record was. So I did doubt it for the longest time. I thought, I'm just going to have to accept what I hear on the TV, and that all these wrestlers are saying Goldberg's streak was padded. No, it wasn't. This guy online, who I wish I remembered his name, I found him about 5 or 6 months ago. He wrote an article, and I am going to share the link to this article so that everybody can see it. He wrote an article that chronologically details every single match that Goldberg had in WCW. And I am telling you, to the number, he did win 170 whatever matches by the time he won the title. His record was legitimate, and I'm fed up of people saying it's not a legitimate record. He didn't really fight that many matches. He actually did. He even fights Bobby Eaton. There are some matches. I think he fought Ricky Morton as well. He fights some incredible wrestlers. Brad Armstrong, he had numerous matches with. If you actually look into his record, it's incredible to see how many he actually had, and to see that he was wrestling 3 or 4 times a week at one point. Now, while that says some stuff, that's not all positive. While I'm defending the streak being legitimate, it also should have demonstrated that Goldberg should have grown and learnt more about the business a lot faster than maybe he did. You could also, again, argue this is the guy's first year in the business and he wins the world title. That's how he did it, because he did actually manage to have matches with very good wrestlers who he no doubt would have at least learned something from. So the streak is real. Stop saying it's fake. Stop going with the flow of popularity and stop being a flipping sheep. Actually do your research and you'll find out that Goldberg legitimately had all of those matches. He really was unbeaten for that many fights. The next was Injuring Bret Hart. This is going to be controversial because a lot of people are going to be angry when they hear this. But I'm going to sound a lot like Vince McMahon. Bret injured Bret. Goldberg was careless. Goldberg was green. Goldberg should never have done the standing sidekick. He was never good at it. I watched the match against DDP, and if you look at what he did there, he almost kicks DDP in the face. Goldberg was just never good at that move. It looked badass because it literally was hurting people. And I imagine it looked so good that someone backstage encouraged Goldberg to keep doing it. And I guess that person thought he'll never kill someone with it. I'm not just defending Goldberg. I would say 60-40 was on Goldberg. We all know when WCW hired Bret Hart, Bret was not the same as the Bret Hart from WWF. He'd been screwed from WE, he was angry, and instead of WCW helping Bret use that anger, they pulled him back, kept him off of TV. It built Bret's frustration up about wrestling. So what happened with Bret was, he, instead of being angry at WE, he actually just got angry with wrestling. So when he went to WCW, he wasn't producing at the same quality level as he had before, and he didn't have the same motivation or heart that he had before. This is why Bret's matches went down. His quality went down because he didn't care about wrestling as much. He did get a bit of it back. I watch a lot of Bret's matches in WCW and I think, wow, there are some really good matches in there. But the truth is, he lost the heart for the business. You could tell that he'd been tainted by the experience with WF and Vince screwing him over. You could tell that WCW mishandled him. And all of that frustration and anger meant that Bret was beginning to become sloppy in the ring. Now, I'm not saying he injured anyone. Far from it. Bret was consummate professional, but he stopped keeping his focus. Honestly, when you watch the Goldberg incident when he kicks him, you can see that Bret also reacts too late. And the reason that I believe he did this is because he was distracted. Not by the match, not by fans or anything silly, but distracted in the general sense that he wasn't there mentally. I think that the truth about Bret Hart in WCW lies somewhere between Bret's opinion and Eric Bischoff's opinion. Eric Bischoff says that Bret was a shell of himself. I disagree with that. The truth is, you can watch matches and you'll see that Bret had something. He still had it. It was there. WCW just didn't know how to pull it out. And vice versa. You can see that Bret wasn't fully invested in everything he was doing because he didn't like WCW. And when it pertains to the incident with Goldberg, it's obvious that he just wasn't all there mentally at that point. He'd sort of checked out. Injuring himself is my next point. Goldberg, of course, being the donut that he is, puts his arm through a limousine windscreen and ruptures ligaments and tendons in his forearm, and that puts him out for ages. While he was hot still for the business as well, while he still had his popularity. Goldberg was his own worst enemy. I think he said in a recent interview that if he could go back, he would become more of a sponge and learn more of the business and try and understand more so that he didn't make these emotional mistakes and outbursts that he was prone to. But that really ruined his career. That ruined the trajectory was still going up when that happened, and it cooled the jets down just as he was still in that elevated state in popularity. So that was a big part of why Goldberg sort of lost steam in WCW and sort of went off the rails after losing the streak. Finally, I want to touch on his modern day reputation. Obviously, I say finally, but before we go to the stats and the review, his modern day reputation is in the dirt. I do not know any single wrestler who has a worse reputation than Bill Goldberg right now. The modern fans hate him. Us old fans get called names for defending him. Nia Jax is far worse than Bill Goldberg. Most of these modern day wrestlers are far worse than Goldberg was at their age. And that's what annoys me. I watch somebody like Joey Janela in a wrestling match, and he looks like he's about to break someone's neck. He is an accidental death waiting to happen. Goldberg was not like that in WCW. Goldberg did stuff that looked terrible. And yes, of course, he hurt people, but not every opponent. Bret never hated working with Goldberg. He hated the fact that Goldberg injured him. The fact that he kicked him in the temple. That's what he hated. And I've said this already, the problem with Goldberg is consistency. That was Goldberg's problem in WCW. Because he didn't love the business, he didn't focus enough on everything he did. In order to be a good wrestler, to be the best, you have to love what you do, because that love makes you a perfectionist, and it means that you pay attention to every little detail that happens within the ring. Goldberg didn't have the love to care. Ric Flair did. Bret Hart did until WCW. And that's why these guys are recognized. Same with Shawn Michaels. When did he get injured? When he cared the least about the business. When Shawn Michaels had attitude and drug problems, that's when he got injured. The reason why is because you lose your focus. You get distracted. You can't think straight or coherently because you're not happy. That's why I said it's Bret who injured Bret, because it's as much on him as anyone else. It takes two to tango. Any of us could walk into somebody's fist and get hurt. But if your mind's there, it'll never happen. And that's partly to blame with Bret, unfortunately. I wish I could just say it was all Goldberg's fault. It wasn't. That's the reality. It was a bit of both. More Goldberg, yes. But it was also heavily on Bret. But back to my point, Goldberg does not injure everyone he ever worked with. There are plenty of wrestlers out there who never got injured by him, never had a problem. The fact is he had 173 matches before he even won the title, and all of those wrestlers are still alive. None of them died because of a move that Goldberg did. None of them broke their neck. None of them had serious injuries. I'm sure there were injuries, but none of them had career-threatening injuries. The only one was Bret. And even with The Undertaker, we know full well why now. That happened because Goldberg was concussed. Shouldn't have even been allowed to wrestle. That's on the WE. That's not on Goldberg. It's not on The Undertaker. That's on WE. They should have stopped the match. They shouldn't have allowed it to go forward, but they did because of the money that they needed for Saudi Arabia's money for paying for that pay-per-view, getting Goldberg on the card, etc., etc. So with all that said, now we're going to have a look at the stats. Goldberg's persona, rate him, then we're going to put him in a ranking, and then we'll finish by announcing who the next guy is for the Wrestling Journal, episode 4. So let's have a look at the first area of Goldberg's persona. There are 4 main categories: character, physique, mic, skills, and technique. Each one of these are scored out of 22. Then there's 4 bonus areas: champion, tag team, stable, and legend. They are scored out of 3 stars. And I'll explain all of those as we go, but we're going to start with character. For Goldberg, I give him 22 out of 22. I think this one doesn't need much explanation. He was more over than Stone Cold Steve Austin at the height of the Attitude Era. That is all I need to say about the character of Bill Goldberg. The only problem that he had, I'm going to talk about later, but in terms of his character, he was more over than Stone Cold. No one can debate that. Goldberg was selling as much merchandise, drawing as many people as Stone Cold Steve Austin was. To pull 40,000 people, sell out a building with a week's notice of a title match, that is very, very rare in wrestling to have that kind of pulling power. There's no one in modern wrestling who could do that, and Goldberg could. So he gets 22 for character. For his physique, that's the next area we're looking at. Physique, we give Goldberg 22 out of 22. I think the only debatable part of Goldberg's physique is the match longevity. He didn't really wrestle for long periods of time. I'm happy to accept that. He didn't wrestle his whole career with 2-minute matches like all the jolly-come-latelys like to accuse him of. But he also didn't wrestle 25-minute matches every week. Had Goldberg had more training and been built up behind the scenes more before he made his debut in wrestling, had Goldberg not taken off so much so quickly, I'm of the belief that Goldberg would have learnt the business more. He would have spent more time crafting the wrestling side of it, understanding what professional wrestling actually meant and was about, and therefore he would have been able to wrestle longer matches. That's my personal opinion of Goldberg. The way that it goes, though, of course, is that he had 173 matches within a year, which is absolutely insane. And while I'm sure he was learning a lot, that's a lot of information. He had an information overload. And so he wasn't able to put everything into practice. And that meant that he couldn't do long matches. The William Regal match in WCW was a prime example of that. If you put him in the ring with a technician and said, "We want you to work," he wasn't able to do it. He was able to follow someone's lead, however. And that's what we know from DDP, from Hulk Hogan, from Sting, from anybody who wrestled with him, Kevin Nash. All of these big matches before the streak ended, he was led by the wrestler he was with, and they managed to let him go for more than 10 minutes. And like I said, the Scott Steiner match was really entertaining. You take out Vince Russo, that match was a great match on its own. And that proves that he could go for a significant period of time in a match and keep you entertained. He was definitely good enough at it, and his body wasn't the problem. It was actually another part of his wrestling persona. So for me, he gets a 22. I don't think there's anybody with a better looking body in wrestling than Goldberg. I actually would argue, I didn't consider Goldberg to be a good looking guy, but the overall package, he had everything. Stone Cold parallels. They had the same attire, bald, the goatee. I get all that. But ultimately, Goldberg had the best wrestling body in the business. He was tall enough that he could lift the giant. He was big enough that he was believable against any opponent, even the ones that were bigger than him. That's really important as a wrestler, particularly in the 90s where big guys are commonplace. And he was so big compared to anybody smaller that you could believe that he'd smash through them in 2 minutes. He was so powerful that the way he picks up Scott Steiner in these matches, if you watch it, this is a guy who knows how to lift weight. And he does it so easily. And I'm sure Steiner is a part of this because Scott Steiner is a brilliant wrestler as well. So he would have helped Goldberg to perfect those power moves, especially someone like Steiner who is a power wrestler. He understands how exactly to make someone look more powerful. But Goldberg was the epitome of what a wrestling physique should be about. So he gets 22 out of 22. Next up, mic skills. I've given Goldberg 18 out of 22. Probably not as surprising here. I've tried looking at Goldberg promos, and the best promo that I've ever found of Goldberg, in my opinion, was the promo he did before he fought The Undertaker. And that says everything it needs to say. Goldberg just wasn't very good on the mic. The way he was built when he started in WCW was perfect. He didn't talk, he got to the ring, he destroyed you, he won, and he left. That's all he needed to do. He sold that really well. And that's why he gets an 18. He made you believe without telling you that he was a badass. Even Stone Cold had to tell you who he was to help make you believe who he was. Stone Cold gave all the smack talk, and that was reinforced with his in-ring work. With Goldberg, you just knew who he was by watching him wrestle, and that brilliant communication between you and the audience without using words, fantastic. So I gave him 18 because he actually had the ability to communicate with the audience without speaking, and that's a really hard thing to do. So on to technique. I have given Goldberg 18 out of 22. Again, I've sort of hinted at this with a lot of what I said in my notes, but butterfly overhead suplex, the Guerrilla press into the front body slam. Goldberg used to do the rolling armbar. This is a guy who could do legitimate and badass looking moves. Not only could he do them, but he made them look flipping good. And this is Goldberg. My best example here, I'm going to compare him to the Ultimate Warrior, because there are so many parallels between those two. But in this area, Goldberg far exceeds anything the Warrior ever did. The Ultimate Warrior had maybe 4, 5, maybe 6 big moves that he could do. That was it. That was Warrior's moveset. He punches, he kicks, he does a double axe handle from the top rope, he can do a clothesline, he can do the shoulder tackle, which of course was his signature move. He can do the Guerrilla press slam followed by the body splash for the pin. And then he can do like an atomic drop if he's fighting against Rick Rude, and a back body drop if he's fighting Hulk Hogan or anybody else. Maybe the odd suplex, maybe the odd scoop slam. So those are the kind of moves that the Warrior had in his moveset. Goldberg did at least double that amount of moves. And Goldberg was able to always make his moves look powerful. He didn't do 3 body slams in a row. The Warrior was so different in this sense. They have so much in common, but in this area, they are actually far more different than people admit. A lot of people think that they were similar and compare them and say Goldberg had a limited moveset. Goldberg did not have a limited moveset. His swinging net breaker was phenomenal. Looked really badass and good. It didn't hurt anybody. It looked good. The question I have with Goldberg, and the reason I wouldn't give him a higher score for technique, is because technically, from a wrestling standpoint, and I'm not a trainer, I don't know that technical background, but it just didn't look like he was executing the move properly. I don't know if it was deliberate from Goldberg. I don't know if he knew how to do it, but he chose not to. I don't know. But what I will say is that he looked badass. It got him over. He didn't kill people in the ring. Bret was hurt by a kick that he never should have done. But I give Goldberg 18 out of 22 because he was better in the ring than the Ultimate Warrior, by far. He was arguably better in the ring than Hogan. The difference was that Hogan had learnt how to sell his moves. He'd learnt all of the psychology around the technique side of the business. Goldberg didn't quite have all of that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the final 4 areas now and wrap this bad boy up. The first we're going to look at is the champion. Now, if you remember, I said that these are scored out of 3 stars. So we'll go through each one and explain them as we go along. The first one is champion. We know that Goldberg has won a minor title. He was the US title holder. He's won the WCW tag titles. We know that he has won a major title. He won the Universal title. He's won the World Heavyweight title in WCW. And we know that he's won it multiple times. He's won both of those last ones twice. So 3 stars for the champion. For the tag team, we know that Goldberg has been in a tag team. We know he has experience in a tag team. And we also know from that WCW tag team title run with Bret Hart that he's also won the title. Now, Goldberg never won those tag belts multiple times. He only ever won it once in his whole career. Wasn't much of a tag wrestler, although I actually feel that was one of the ways to give his career longevity, was to do a bit like The Undertaker. Put him in a tag team, make it badass, and let it go for a long time. Maybe that was the plan with Bret, I don't know, but technical wrestler with Goldberg would have been an exceptional tag team. They would have been tag champs for a long time. Part of me believes that's how Goldberg should have started in the business. They should have won all their matches as a tag team, and then as Goldberg was starting to get over, the other partner should have started envying Goldberg, and then that wrestler would have challenged Goldberg to a match. They would have had a feud. Goldberg would have kept winning, and then the streak would have continued from there. That's how I would have started him, because I think being in a tag team would have helped him to learn the business. He could have done the 2-minute spots. He could have still got over as this badass guy. He even could have finished all the tag matches. And that's what would have started the bitterness within the rivalry. The tag partner hating the fact that Goldberg is finishing every match for the tag team, never giving him a chance to finish the matches even though he believes he's good enough. Someone like a Benoit would have been brilliant at that. Let's move on to the stable next. This one's a controversial area to look at. Goldberg did have a manager when he was in a stable, so these ones often go hand in hand. So the first star is, did the guy have a manager, or was he a manager at any point? He was both. He was a manager and he had a manager when he was in the Millionaires Club. The next question to that is, of course, was he in a stable? Did he have the experience of being in a stable at all? We know that he was in the Millionaires Club in WCW. Now, the final star is the question, was he ever the lead of a stable? This is a bit of a grey area. My interpretation is he was in the Millionaires Club. He was therefore one of the leaders of the stable. Some people may argue differently, but for me, Goldberg was one of the lead characters in that stable. Therefore, he gets 3 stars for the stable section. Finally, we talk about the legend category. And of course, we have a legend without the title, which he is. He's a Hall of Famer. We have a legend with the title, and as we know, he's won the belts. He's won the biggest belts in the business, so he's therefore got those 2 stars. Finally, did he ever main event one of the big pay-per-views of a major promotion, i.e. WrestleMania for the WE, Starrcade for WCW? We know he did both, so we give him 3 stars for the legend category. And if you've got your Scott Steiner mathematical hat on, you will know that that gives Goldberg the overall score of 91 out of 100 for Goldberg. So where does that leave Bill Goldberg? When we look at the rating, we also conclude with the ranking position. So where does Goldberg fit on the greatest of all time wrestler list? We know that Kevin Nash is in the top 15. We know that Randy Orton is 12th. Bill Goldberg, rated lower than both of those guys. He actually has a ranking position of 21st. So Goldberg just misses out on the top 20 wrestlers of all time, mainly because of the things we discussed with the mic skills and the technique. Had he embraced wrestling not just as a money-spinning tool, but actually embraced it as this is something that I love and can get into, I think he's acknowledged that once he had a kid, he realized what wrestling meant because he saw how happy his kid was when he went to watch wrestling or if he saw it on TV. And he realized this is why I should have been doing it in the first place. If I'd have had a kid, I would have understood this is why I'm in wrestling, to make my kid proud, to make him see that daddy is a superhero. And all of that stuff would have come out of him and it would have been great. I'm sure that that would have helped to heighten his passion for the business. So that's it for Bill Goldberg's review. That's it for episode 3. In fact, I hope you've enjoyed it today. It's been a long one. We've had a good conversation, some controversial subjects, but also on a controversial character as well. So I feel like this whole episode has been wrapped up in controversy and discussion. If you have agreed with what I say, if you disagreed with what I say, please join me online in the debate. Let's talk online, respectfully, of course. You can do that by using the hashtag #TheWrestlingJournal. If you're on Twitter or Instagram, wherever you are, use that hashtag. Or you can @ me directly, either through XHarper, which is my personal account, or you can @ me at Wrestling Journal, and that's Wrestling Journal minus the A and the L, add the O. It will be on your screen if you're watching on YouTube. @ me there, talk to me, let's get the conversation moving. Tell me why you believe Bill Goldberg only ever had 2-minute matches. Tell me why you believe that Goldberg didn't really win 173 matches and that streak was all a padded fake mess. Tell me all that stuff. Or you can agree with me. In fact, I'd really love it if I could get some of you eating that humble pie and apologizing for thinking what all the popularist views were and that you've realized and come to your senses to reality that Goldberg actually had all those matches and did win all of them. Okay, enough of my rant now. We're going to wrap up this episode by announcing who we're going to actually feature in episode 4. I've got to be honest with you, before this episode, I didn't really plan who I was going to talk about in the next episode. So this week, I kind of thought to myself, I need to get my act together a little bit on this. I've actually put the whole of the first season together now, so I know all 20 episodes, who they're going to be, how I'm going to end it. The last episode of the season is going to be one of my top 10 wrestlers of all time. And what I've decided to do is that at the end of every season, I'm going to feature one of the top 10. Obviously, in the midst of all of that, we're going to talk and explore about all of the other wrestlers in between on my list. I've got about 300, 400 wrestlers on the list in total. So there's loads to talk about in the interim period. But I want to end it with a bang each season and make sure that you guys know one of the top 10 and we can keep things going and sweet and we can end on a high note before we begin the next season. The other thing that I've been doing as well is each week I'm alternating. So one week I do a legend, the next week I do a modern wrestler, somebody who's currently wrestling full time in WE or any of the promotions really. As long as they're worth looking at and reviewing, I'll look at them. Goldberg, therefore, as a part-time wrestler, is part of the Legends category. So next week's going to be one of the full-time guys. And it's going to be none other, wait for this, none other than Keith Lee. So episode 4 is going to be me reviewing Keith Lee. I really hope that you join me for that one. I hope that you listen to the other ones. If you haven't heard any of the previous episodes, go back on those, listen through them, see what you think, join that debate. If you want to talk to me about Kevin Nash, let's do that. I want to talk wrestling. I love it. It's my life. It's been a big part of who I've been growing up. So with all that influence, I'm always up for a good debate on it. Tell me what you think about either Nash Randy Orton or Bill Goldberg or even anybody else in the business that you want to talk to me about. So that's it. We are done with episode 4. Please get in touch. Let me know what you think. If you're watching this on YouTube, give the comment the thumbs up. If you do give it a thumbs down, I always say, please actually leave constructive criticism so I can understand what I can do better, because I'm always open to improving. I'm not Goldberg. I will improve if you tell me what you'd like to see, things that you don't want to see as much in the episode, all that stuff. Obviously, if you tell me you just don't want to hear my voice anymore, that ain't going to happen. This is a passion project, something that I love to do because wrestling's been a big part of my life. And this is my way of just giving something back to not only the wrestlers, but to the wrestling community as well. But as for now, I'm X Harper. You guys are awesome. And until next time, I'll see you soon.